was going to open with the fact that, well, again, like, I find myself as this kind of accidental progressive. And I've established now, through many autobiographical details, that I'm something of a contrarian. And so I occupy these spaces, but I never really commit myself to any of them, which doesn't mean that I'd like to think, can't participate. And that's what appeals to me about the space that has emerged around you, is that it is such a genuinely pluralistic space. And I mean that in the best possible sense of the word. And I don't mean pluralism mistaken for perennialism, but I mean a genuine pluralism which actually accommodates a genuine diversity of thought. At least that's what I value about this little corner of the internet. And it's what, dismays me about both the conservative OPC, where as far as I know, I'm still listed in the bulletin as an apostate, and the mainline Presbyterian church, where, it's like incidentally Christian.
Hi, this is Paul, and there's some randos that I forget I've never actually sort of done the initiation with, and CW is one of them. And so he reminded me a few weeks ago that he and I have never been, had the proper initiation right, the proper introduction. And so we're going to do this today. CW, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's a little weird because, yeah, it's almost like it's like going on a show, but then the whole premise of the show is just have a normal, casual conversation.
Well, usually the first one isn't just a normal, casual conversation. It's much more of a
getting to know you.
Getting to know you, and people have gotten a chance to know me. And you've been around the corner now quite a while. So, and people have met you at different places, and you were at the Chicago conference last year in June before Synod 2022. You've been on CRC Voices. So yeah, this is going to be good because I've gotten to know bits of your story, but never sort of had the whole panorama.
Well, that's another awkward thing too, because I'm very resistant to the notion that my story is the hermeneutic key to understanding me as a person.
Oh, I can already tell this is going to be interesting. So, well, let's begin where I begin. Tell me about the house you grew up in.
Well, first I should say that the whole format of this, so I tried to explain what I was doing with you to the pastor of this church I kind of lurk at. I guess it's the closest thing to attending that I have right now. It's like when I got excommunicated from the OPC, I went to this church because I knew that they would give communion to, like a duck, essentially. Maybe not literally, but, animal blessings aside and all that, but
ducks eat bread.
They like it. But so that was why I ended up there. But all of that makes me a kind of accidental progressive. And I remember sort of watching your video with Preston Sprinkle, I think, in which he said, well, I would love to have conversations with the progressives, but they just don't seem to want to have conversations.
Maybe this is what we're doing today.
Well, that was an observation that you made. But then it's like I said, I'm kind of an accidental progressive, so it's awkward to me because, when I'm this might not make a lot of sense for people, but for those who are aware of the landscape of Reformed Protestantism, this will be enlightening, perhaps. So yeah, I was a member at an Orthodox Presbyterian church, but I always was kind of an awkward thing there. You know, I was never really natively that conservative theologically, even when I started going there. And I remember, you know, the pastor, it was a little church plant, and he was really eager, you know, to get buy-in, and I was like going to everything. And so he was always kind of trying to
Nothing will get a pastor of a small church more excited than someone starts doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. But I had not really intended to join the church. But in his mind, I was like the perfect person to become a formal member because, you know, I'm so interested in Reformed theology. I come to like all of the events. You know, it's just like a natural. Okay. And I think they even had some kind of perverse incentive where, you know, they had to have like achieve a certain critical mass to become like a particular congregation or whatever. So I mean, there is even like benchmarks perhaps that were informing this you know, intuition he had that I was the ideal church member, perhaps contrary to other concerning pieces of information, including my own apprehension, maybe.
We tend to filter things, don't we?
Well, I even had a kind of, you know, ultimately self-fulfilling, perhaps, but prophecy where I said, you know, if I become a member, you're just going to excommunicate me. And sure enough, absolutely. But
well, we will get to that story, but I want to know the origins of you. So,
then, well, just a second though. So then I find myself at like the exact polar opposite in Reformed Protestantism, which is like the downtown mainline PCUSA church. And I imagine that they don't think of themselves this way, but I imagine that many around the corner would characterize them as woke. And you know, in their understanding, I think they would probably be right. Like you know, they had like a big Cornell West quote on a huge banner on the side, you know, like justice is what love looks like in public, I believe. So it's very, very much like social justice oriented, um, you know, and well, and then they, for Lent, they actually have like interfaith dialogues, like on the dais of the in the sanctuary.
Hmm.
And I used to joke that Westminster gives up Christianity for Lent. They'd have like an imam, you know. But so that's kind of what that church is like, right? It's almost like sometimes I think of it as like a political action committee that is sort of set up under the guise of a church. I know they would not like that, but
so, well, that is what some of these churches have become.
Yeah, I mean they don't endorse candidates, Paul.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah, they don't even need to. We all know who their endorsed candidates are, even if they fail to announce them.
Yeah, well, and just as a point of reference, so like Walter Mondale was a member, you know, before he passed, a longstanding member of this church. So I mean, it also has that kind of like in some regions Episcopalian like vibe.
Right.
This is where the, you know, the ruling elite
these were the Christian nationalists of the up until very recently, who in fact wielded power in America, you know, without any rivals. These are the original Christian nationalists here.
Yeah, Paul, globalism is the new Christian nationalism. Do you not get the memo?
I got it. I totally got it. It's Christian imperialism.
So Tim Hart Anderson is the senior pastor of this church. He just announced his intention to retire, and you know, as good Presbyterians, they have this like 5-year plan to figure out this. It's not quite 5-year plan, but a really long, involved plan to figure out the succession arrangement. But I tried to explain to him what it was I was attempting to do in talking to you, and his advice was to listen.
Oh, that's not going to work here. If you want to listen, I've got plenty of other material on the internet. This is not, these conversations are not about PVK. You are the star of this show, CW. You're not going to get out of it that way.
Yeah. I said, I don't think you understand what what the premise of this is.
He clearly has not watched the channel.
No, I doubt he's watched the channel, but he's an interesting figure, though. So I did ask him in preparation for this conversation, because what really inspired me to talk to you is the goings on in the CRC, and the sort of intricacies of this church family sort of rending itself apart. And so he came to Westminster from San Francisco and actually founded one of the organizations, which I imagine would be comparable to, like, what is it, Abide
are the conservatives, all one body are the progressives.
Yeah, these kinds of entities that have sort of emerged to try and win the hearts and minds of the requisite players, I guess, and also ease the consciences of the belligerents, I suppose. But so he founded one of these entities that was instrumental in lobbying the General Assembly when the Mainline Presbyterian Church went through a similar controversy. And so, I had heard all these sort of murmurings among people in the congregation about how, Tim was really essential in the affirming events and in the denomination, ultimately taking the path that it did. And so I thought that I would ask him about this, and he would have some, more or less story that lined up with that, right? But I told him that I had heard people say that he was sort of this instrumental figure. He's like, well, I don't know about that. And so I tried to press, like, well, what did you do? And the way he described his involvement was, he founded this organization. It was a moderate organization. The aim was to prevent the schism.
Oh, so they were better together. That's the CRC organization that's trying to avoid the schism.
And all he said after that was, and we failed. So this is his view of his involvement. Was that it was, it's not shameful necessarily, it was a valiant effort, I suppose, but in his mind it was an abject failure and not something to be celebrated or lauded necessarily. So I wonder if you, Paul, are heading towards a similar fate, because I did hear your interesting sort of, although kind of scant proposal of maybe having like a parallel synod, but having a way to maintain institutional unity of these two divergent factions, I guess.
Some form of institutional unity. You have joint custody of children after a divorce, and in many ways the institutions are the children of the Christian Reformed Church. But you, my friend, are trying to make away with the goods without paying the price.
Yeah.
The price. I work for stories, my friend, and you have yet to give me one, and you want to distract me with the drama within my own denominational house without coughing up anything about yourself. And we're here to learn about you.
I do have a story that is apropos. It doesn't start with the house I was born in, although I can tell you. You asked, is that what you asked? Where...
That is what I asked, but if you say the story is apropos, we can start there.
Well, no, actually the house I was born in is kind of funny. I was born in a house, in fact, on Pill Hill in Rochester, Minnesota. which is ironically perhaps not in the shadow, but overlooking possibly the world's premier hospital. But yeah, I was born by midwife at home in this rather kind of pretentious neighborhood.
Wow.
Rochester, Minnesota. So that's the story of my noble birth.
And why a midwife, and why not in a in a clinic whose name we seem to be avoiding?
The Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, aren't they in Rochester?
Yeah, no, that is indeed what I was referring to. But
I thought it was.
yeah, no, I wasn't a secret or anything. I just figured people would know. But,
why did your mother want midwife birth? Were you also born in a hot tub?
I do not think it was a water birth. I guess that was just her thing. Well, my parents were kind of that generation, that were like the hippies who became conservative Republicans through like some form of Jesus movement, fundamentalist Christianity. They were kind of in that class.
Okay.
Although I'm not sure how hippie they were, but they definitely became conservative Republicans. Like,
interesting.
Yeah, like they, yeah. Well, and they met in the Way International, which of course is where Sam grew up. Our own heretic Sam.
This is why I dig. This is why I dig. It's like Burn Powers, but first we dig.
But first we dig. Yeah, I had like a 2-hour and 45-minute conversation with Burn, and I was more curious about him, so I ended up not really disclosing much of anything.
Yes. I think I know your way. So parents met in the Way International.
Yeah, my dad was a campus minister or evangelist or something to that effect. So he was actually from Wisconsin, and they shipped him out through the Way to Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee, to lead campus Bible studies, which I'm not sure why that makes any sense, but that's apparently what happened. And my mother was attending school there. She was studying journalism, and that was where they met, in one of these little, twig was the nomenclature for there.
Wig. Wow.
Yeah, which stood for something, but
it must have, because they wouldn't pick it otherwise.
I don't remember.
So that's how they met, and they were married.
So they met, they got married in a house, and my mother enjoyed doing things in houses.
I guess so. How many siblings?
So I have an older brother, and he was born in Florida. That's where they were before they came back up here. So my dad,
also in a house?
I believe so. Yeah, and not as auspicious a house.
Home churching, home birthing. We do everything at home in this family, apparently.
Yeah.
Homeschooled?
So my brother was homeschooled up to 5th grade. My mother said she attempted to homeschool me, but I wouldn't believe anything she said. So, so she had to send me up to the public school. It sounds about right. I think.
Sound about right.
Yeah, I don't have lots of memories of that, but I'm sure that's accurate, more or less.
Okay. Did you go to church, or were you house churching? And did your parents stick with this, or did they?
So this is a crazy thing. So part of my whole mythology was in fact, the absence of my father. So the way that happened was, kind of its own complex story, I guess. But it's weird because it's not really my story. So it's hard for me.
If it's not your story, you can beg. You can.
Yeah, I don't mind talking about it, but but it's like difficult for me to really know or understand what happened and why exactly.
Yeah.
it's more kind of their story, I guess. It obviously greatly affected me,
You can
but
tell it from your point of view. That is your story. So
yeah,
he was
well,
gone.
yeah. I mean, this is like the initial elements aren't even from my point of view. They're just things that I've sort of been told or
Mm.
led to believe. But yeah, so they went to Florida. It was kind of a crazy thing because my dad actually dropped out of college, I guess, to do this like college outreach ministry, which again doesn't necessarily make the most sense. And then, so they both applied to what was the Way's seminary, which I think was something called the Way Corps or whatever. And the Way was very like egalitarian in terms of women being, it's charismatic movement. So in terms of women being involved in teaching and stuff, they were more or less equal opportunity as far as I know. And so they were going to kind of join the seminary and go into ministry in the Way, which, by the way, as a Protestant denomination, very, very unfortunately viewed itself as the one true church, which in my mind actually precludes it from being genuinely Protestant. But maybe in some, in the sense that it's not Orthodox or Catholic, it's Protestant in that sense. But in any other sense, I would say it is deviant, or I don't know what you would call it exactly, but so it's very disappointed. Yeah, well, that was kind of a weird dynamic too, because I, ended up being very interested in my Christian religion, which came to me from my, single, divorced mother who had not been permitted to participate in church life because somewhere along the road there, my dad became a deist. And they moved to Florida. The story about the White Corps was they rejected my dad because he never finished his undergrad, but they accepted my mom. And so they decided that wasn't going to work. And so instead they moved to Florida to start, one of these Way businesses that's supposed to facilitate their little house church movement thing that they do. And so he was in charge of a custodial company for them in Florida, and they started getting involved in politics, and my dad sort of started slowly drifting away from his faith, I guess. But part of that was he at some point realized that he could do this custodial business and not send all the money back to the religious entity. And so he ended up kind of like splitting himself off, I guess, and keeping the business in one way or another. Which I don't know what the ramifications, if any, there were of that, but that was kind of how their marriage started. And my brother was sort of born at some point after that in Florida. But yeah, they ended up back in Minnesota because my dad is from here. He has kind of a weird childhood. He was the product of my grandfather's third marriage. And so he was well into retirement by the time my dad was born. So my dad actually grew up dividing his time between Rochester and Naples, Florida,
Huh.
hanging out with all the old people, and that was kind of like his childhood.
Wow. How old was your father's mother then, his biological mother? Was she
I
quite a bit younger than her husband?
do not know. I do not know.
You've never done any genealogy work on your family, just to even
Not
find birthdays?
especially. I mean, I know some things. Like my most luminary ancestor was Thomas Wentworth, the Earl of Stratford. He was
Oh.
like, yeah, and well, that was a weird irony too, because of course, I ended up going to the. Well, I've been Presbyterian all this time, and it's like effectively the Presbyterians who killed him, like because it was the same Parliament that actually convened the Westminster Divines and produced the Westminster Confession, was the Parliament that executed Thomas Wentworth. So that's a whole weird historical irony, perhaps.
So
But
you grew up in a single parent family.
yeah, so my single mother sort of, after a long kind of spiritual drought, ended up taking us kids to, so this is after my dad finally left. And so I guess I was in like uh, first, second grade when that was happening.
Wow.
However old that is.
First, second grade, 7, maybe 7
Yeah.
years old. It's pretty young.
Yeah. So, well, that was the funny thing because years later, I would meet my dad right before going to Bible college. And that was a whole like crazy thing because, a couple of years before that, like, so we hadn't heard anything about him at all. It was as if he'd like dropped off the face of the earth, essentially. And a couple of years before I turned 18, he was on the news because he was wanted by the FBI because he was assuming people, well, and then I don't know all the details, but my understanding of it is that he was like assuming people's mortgages under a kind of like a series of assumed entities that may or may not have actually existed. And then he would, build up this huge real estate portfolio, but subsequently perhaps fail to keep up on some of the payments, and end up kind of screwing these people who had allowed him to take over this mortgage under false pretenses because he supposedly represented these organizations that didn't actually exist, kind of a thing. And the funny thing was, what he was doing for the most, like the part about assuming the mortgage and not paying it was not actually illegal, but he was like screwing over so many people that they were really like looking into him, and it was kind of like how wire fraud is like how you take down anybody who's just like a problem.
Right.
Except so in this case, they got him for like social security fraud or something because he had like falsified some, papers of incorporation or something like that.
Oh, man.
But so at the time they were just looking for him, and they actually had footage of him from the house that we had lived in Lakeville before my parents got divorced. So it was like really surreal because they had him like driving out in this little blue station wagon he had bought after he had separated from my mom, and he almost like ran over the reporter. So he was like hiding his face with one of those like dashboard clipboard things. And then he like drove off in this little like Japanese mid-sized station wagon, which I vividly recall that vehicle because the last time I had seen my dad as a child was my brother and I were getting out of school, and he appeared in this little blue station wagon. And he's our dad or whatever. He didn't live in the house, although even when he did, he was like barely around anyway. so so he just appeared, and so we just got in the car and he took us to the Dairy Queen. And all I remember was really just it being silent. And like you said, it was a long time ago, so I'm not sure how accurate this memory is, but I remember, riding in the little blue car that was like new car smell, going to the Dairy Queen, sitting there with my dad, not really like talking or anything, just kind of like he got us ice cream or something. And then when we got back, like he drove away and we went in, and my mom was freaking out because apparently he had not told her that he was going to pick us up or what he was doing or anything. And so she thought we were dead or kidnapped, or, this is like the Jacob Wetterling era and all of that sort of thing. And that was like, yeah, that was the last time I saw my dad. So I don't know like what the hell he was doing exactly. If he was like, I'm gonna like say goodbye to my kids or like see them one last time or something. I'm not sure what. I never really figured out. Well, I suppose I could ask him, but he probably doesn't even remember anymore. But
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. Well, okay. I think you've paid your debt.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I mean, I have so many stories, Paul. It could go on. Could go on forever. Like there's the sins of
So
the fathers, like...
So what was school like for you? Public school?
Yeah, I went to public school. I actually dropped out of well, here it wasn't even high school yet. So it's kind of organized. It was ninth grade was and I guess from some places that is high school, but in where I was, it was 789 was junior high. So I was in the kind of at the cusp of going to high school.
And you dropped out.
And I dropped out.
Did you go to juvie or hall or something? Did you do a crime? No?
No, I managed to never do any. You know, I've never even smoked a cigarette, Paul, a tobacco cigarette.
You and I both.
At various times in my life, I've been mistaken for a pothead. I think just because I have long hair and I have kind of a laid back attitude, maybe, I'm not sure. But I'm not.
The affectation without the chemical.
Grizz or anyone else, but I'm not, in fact, a pothead.
And I do see an occult sign on that beverage that you're sucking, though. So,
yeah.
We've yet to hear Grim Grizz really call out Starbucks, have we? You know, as the occult capitalist institution that they are. But anyway,
yeah, it's coming.
So you dropped out of. You did go to Bible college and met a certain Mo at Bible college, though. I picked that up in Chicago.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, while I was in Bible college, I was on the same floor, Colby 17, as our friend Mo, who was a music major, I believe, actually. So I was attempting to study theology. So yeah, that's kind of what happened to me. So my, my dad always loomed large over my childhood, or rather the absence of him loomed large. He was kind of this mythological figure, especially after it emerged that he was like wanted by the FBI. You know, that just sort of added to the the mystique of everything. You know, and but then this intrepid clerk at the county somehow had tracked him down and was able to sort of begin a process by which because he owed my mom like all the child support basically, so he never paid like anything. And so, you know, I had this long outstanding child support debt, which, you know, those can be tricky to enforce. I don't know if people are familiar with those kinds of situations or not, but
I know homeless people that when the stimulus checks came out, they were complaining to me how their stimulus checks got taken by their back child support. And these are men in their 60s. So yeah, child support's an interesting whole thing.
Yeah, it helps to be your own boss and to own property. So it's much easier to evade the traditional methods of siphoning off your income and forcing you to do the right thing. So
I guess I could entitle this video "How to Evade Child Support," and that might make it go viral. You never know.
Yeah, there you go. But so my dad, you know, I wrote him a letter because he was out there now, like he was in contact with my mom. The person at the county said that they couldn't give me his information, but that if I wanted, I could, write something and she would like pass it on to him. Wow. Which I found rather annoying. It's not like I was fucking adopted or something and they're like laws, and I thought that was pretty annoying. And my dad was like evading the FBI for years, so he's pretty good at like not being found. So I would dogpile or Yahoo or whatever the emerging thing was to try and see if I could find anything about him. And well, I mean, he had like changed his name and stuff too, which I didn't even really realize. That all came out at the trial when he was sent to federal penitentiary, which I was also not allowed to go to. My mom would not let me go to it, which at the time I was not an adult yet, so that was rather frustrating too. But yeah, so eventually I wrote him this letter. It was very conciliatory. I had already been accepted into Bible college at that point, and so I saw this as part of my almost like Luke Skywalker like destiny.
Well, why did you apply for Bible college? I mean, obviously you must have had some kind of religious experience in your youth
my mom brought me to my brother to sort of suburban Baptist church, which has interestingly since become a kind of, I mean, it's just sort of like a non-denominational megachurch now, but it was part of the Baptist General Conference, which changed their name inexplicably to some weird thing that I can never remember. Like I remember your video about like the buzzwords or holy words. I feel like the name of that denomination is some sort of buzzword. Like,
Yeah, well, we used to have home missions and world missions, and they became Resonate. And then now
yeah,
we got pastor church relations and all these church offices, and now they put them all together in an agency and they called it Thrive.
that's something weird like emerge or convert.
Emerge, that's
And so
right.
yeah, something weird like that.
We're not a church, we're a movement.
Yeah, I was long since out of there by the time all that went down, but it endlessly fascinates me, like driving by the church I was baptized. So I was baptized in that church when I was 8. So I mean, according to your math, this is like a really quick turnaround, Paul.
Yeah.
Which interestingly, I would tell people later, when I became more Presbyterian in my affiliations, that paedo baptism wasn't really a thing for me because I pretty much regarded my believer baptism as a paedo baptism because I didn't know what the hell I was I was doing. I don't remember having like a credible profession of faith, although they thought that I did evidently.
It was good enough. 8-year-old, a pedo 8-year-old. Yeah, that's pretty pedo, but go on.
Well, I'm just saying, to me, I viewed it more or less like that because it's not like in my mind I had made a credible profession and
Do
chose.
you love Jesus? Yes. Good enough.
Yeah, but at the same time, I had to admit that I did not feel any compulsion to, redo my baptism or something. And so I was of the
Good for
mind,
you.
yeah, I was of the mind to like call it good. And so that sort of made it easier for me to accept which I guess is a big bugaboo for a lot of people coming from a Baptist background to Presbyterianism. But it never really bothered me because I was like, oh, yeah, that's like essentially what I did. Anyway, but I didn't have the benefit of like confirmation.
But
like,
we got you dropping out of late middle school and going to Bible college. I mean, yeah, I mean, you need I don't want to say anything bad about Bible colleges, but you at least got to be able to manage school in Bible college. You got to write papers and stuff. So what
yeah,
did you?
well, so in the interim there, I had, so I got a GED,
Okay.
which was really easy for me anyway. Like, it was kind of like an afterthought, It was like, oh, this is, and in my mind later, I was like, well, that was like the easiest way to do high school
It's true.
because I just tested out effectively. Which, but yeah, I worked at the Lego Imagination Center. I bought a Pontiac Fiero.
Oh, I remember the Fiero.
Yeah, it was a little white GT fastback Fiero.
Yeah.
And I was living my best life, Paul. It was incredible. After I got the GED, I actually went to community college. So I did end up so after all the BS of high school was neutralized, I went to college, community college anyway, where it was much less of a social war zone.
Yeah. Community college is mostly just kind of little after college, but no, none of the high school vibes, just class.
So that suited me much better because I was always kind of a misfit. I never really belonged. Well, I had a really close cohort of similarly misfit people. So I think I was lucky in that sense. And some of them I still fairly close to this day. Although
Well,
we did manage.
the relationship between you and Mo has been able to continue. So and then you go to Moody. Of all the Bible colleges in America you can pick from, you chose that one. Why?
Yeah, so Moody had the benefit of being free, and it was
that's not a thing to overlook.
and it was also in Chicago, And as a child, I like for some reason I've always been kind of drawn to urban aesthetic, I guess, and the city. Like, so we lived in this little townhome complex in a southern suburb here of Minneapolis. And there was like a hill in the center that they had created with all the, dirt from the foundations of these rows of townhomes. There's like this little artificial hill. And I used to like walk up on this hill and gaze at the Oz-like skyline of Minneapolis, sort of fantasizing about like what adults do in the real world, and like, so I've always had this kind of longing, I guess, for the city. And when I was a kid, I actually had a poster of Chicago over my bed.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I was always fascinated by Chicago. The idea of, I've never been there, the idea of living in Chicago, studying
The
there
Windy City there on the lake.
was really appealing to me. And, it fit essentially my broad conservative evangelical upbringing. Although, there's a whole story there too, Paul. Like, and I don't know if
We're here for the stories.
there's a whole story there. So yeah, well, so when I was like 16, we had switched churches. I was no longer at the Baptist church that we've been going to. My mom took us to this. It was basically like the mega church at the time in the state of Minnesota. It was the largest church at the time. It's called Grace Church. At the time, it was Grace.
A very unique name for an evangelical church.
Yeah, it's really bold messaging. But it used to be, I think, Lake Harriet Baptist Church way back in the day. So even they had been, but they were always unaffiliated Baptist. And so then eventually they just dropped the Baptist, and they were very much in the Rick Warren, Saddleback, kind of church growth philosophy. There was always like statistics from George Barna, in the pulpit, sort of giving us an idea of what the landscape was, And this church had, they had some kind of pastoral transition way back when. They were healthy, but not really growing or huge or anything. And one of the interim pastors was a Dr. John Egan. And he had been the president of Crown College. So he was actually an administrator. He had no background in theology. And in fact, he did his PhD in, I believe it was, he studied education, but his dissertation was in like long range planning. And so, but he was apparently a compelling preacher, and they hired him as the senior pastor. And he was the one who really grew the church. And when you say like long range planning, he had this crazy method where he would write his sermons 6 months in advance.
Oh yeah, that was popular for a while with preachers.
He was one of those people. And so, similar, I guess, to my own social experience in school being difficult, I never really felt integrated, I guess, let's say, into the youth ministry either. But I did really enjoy the adult service.
Oh.
Where Dr.
Which just nowhere near as sexy as like adult bookstore or something like that.
No, but it was so even at the height of the thing in the old building, they ended up building one of these like gigantic, monstrosities out in further flung suburbs. And it's really like it was the first church of its kind like that here. But so the whole time I was there, it was all like the ramp up to that. Like the capital campaign and the like, this is what God's calling us.
Those are the storied years of the,
Yeah, it was like the Camelot era of Grace Church, and And it was very much like, he was a fan of like the West Wing and Star Trek. And so he even had like this, so, it was all like Captain Picard, symposium and leadership and stuff. I mean, I don't think he really talked about that from the pulpit.
The call to worship wasn't engage.
Well, all that to say, like, so the church in a weird way, like kind of felt Star Trekky, like the architecture. Like, so it was all like white in the sanctuary and it had these kind of artificial plants that like, you could imagine sort of on the Enterprise somewhere. Like it had this very like Star Trek like vibe to it, weirdly. I mean, it's kind of hard to quantify, I guess. But if there's any doubt, there was a room off the stage and it was called the pastor's ready room.
The ready room.
Yeah, and this became like a kind of architectural trademark that Dr. Egan brought to the
wow
the church as the pastor's ready room.
Pastor's ready room. You just imagine these pastors in suits sitting in these leather chairs, leaning back like fighter pilots, ready to launch.
Yeah, exactly. With with the little holographic Moriarty sitting on their desk, all the trinkets from their various misadventures.
All right. So what did you take away from Moody Bible College?
Well, I was going to say that when I was 16, I felt called to pastoral ministry, which
who wouldn't after the church experience like that?
Yeah, well. So that was the thing about it that was awkward was, nobody saw me as like a leadership potential.
You weren't the captain of the football team.
No,
you weren't even in school.
I was the guy who was like barely even involved. Like I was like maybe present noticeably, perhaps, in the youth ministry. But yeah, I mean, I was captivated by the, I guess the public profession of the faith, and I really did idolize Dr. Egan. Like at one point, I even got his autograph, which I still have to this day.
Hold on to that thing. There's probably not a lot of them out there.
With his letter of resignation symbolically underneath to represent the rise and fall of my former hero. Yeah. So, because what happened was like, so when I turned 18, the church was like moving into the new facility, this crazy huge, like 4,500 seat worship center they had constructed. And Dr. Egan, ironically, was beginning this series called The Road to Armageddon, which he would only, I believe, preach 2 sermons from the series, because it turned out he was having an affair with his longtime personal assistant, executive assistant. And,
it really was the adult service.
It really was. And so this came to light, and the elders, kind of dramatically met him at the airport, because I think he was like I don't know if it was Africa or he was in some crazy other part of the world, because Grace has always had like this really aggressive, well-funded missions program.
Right.
And so he was out there playing, the ambassador of Christianity to some poor godforsaken place, and setting up relationships and all of these things, and doing his, his Dr. Egan on top of the world kind of thing. And then yeah, they met him at the airport, and he basically forced him to resign. Right, just right there like that. But the interesting thing was, so I had actually turned 18, like right in the midst of all these things happening. So like they were just moving into the new building before they even moved in. I was like, I gotta find my own church. I want to go into ministry. I need to like strike out on my own. I care about the city. I want to like be in a more urban context. And
what year was this around?
I guess this would have been like 2002-ish.
Okay.
More or less.
Okay.
And so I had heard about Bethlehem.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
John Piper.
You see where this is going. And so I had actually visited there, and yeah, and I was just like completely blown away by his preaching. It was like radically different than anything I had
And
ever
Dr. Egan's, huh?
heard before. Yeah, it was much more, I would say, theological.
Yes, it would definitely be theological and reformed.
And then yes, and when that, so I became a Calvinist at Bethlehem.
Good for you.
But what happened was I ended up signing up for the membership class that first day I was there. So
Wow.
the very first day I went, I was like, this is the place I want to be. And interestingly, to even apply to Moody, you have to be a member of a church. And if I had
Yes.
not, like for some unknown reason, decided to join that precise moment, I would not have been a member in time to apply when I did.
Well,
So
you'd be surprised how many people apply. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised how many people apply to Bible college, and people will come up to me and say, Pastor, I want to be a minister. Well, what church do you go to? Well, it's like you're not even a member of the church and you want to lead one.
yeah. Well, yeah. Well, so it was just I viewed it as very fortuitous because it all kind of like, and one that was very much my mindset at the time. Also, was one of like providence and all these things, all these dramatic things were happening. Like my dad, who was supposed to like never be part of my life, was now suddenly like part of my life, and like I was, accepted into Bible college. And it was all very like providential. The way and I even thought that was providence because I like filled out the essays for the application like the night before I sent it in, which was probably just more like procrastination than providence, but I regarded it as that as providential too, like because it was all sort of stream of consciousness or something like that. But yeah, so I also the big thing that I thought was um, a gracious thing for me at the time was that I had kind of like psychologically transferred my allegiance from like Dr. Egan as my role model to like John Piper as my role model, like right before he like spectacularly imploded.
You had a ministerial father figure transfer.
Yeah, and I viewed that as very fortuitous because in my mind, if I had, not made that kind of psychological shift, I think it would have been much more devastating to me and perhaps even, cast doubt on my trajectory and all of that. But I was not so personally, invested in Dr. Egan as the archetype anymore by the time that had happened, which is ridiculous because it was only like a few months difference or something. But by
things move fast when you're young.
yeah. I mean, I was still going there to get the tapes, like the sermon tapes. People remember back in the old days when you could get
there used to be sermon tapes.
which I could play in my Fiero, which was the perfect era for
Yes, there were cassette players in cars, and back in the day of the Willow Creek Association, you could get those every month. They'd send you a little tape if your church was part of the Willow Creek Association, and you just pop those in your cars. And the minister, when he's driving around town visiting people, he just listened to little Bill Hybels' "Pick Me Up."
yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's exactly. Although you probably couldn't really hear much over the engine of the Fiero. not the best. Not the best audio experience.
Not the heyday of General Motors, but
yeah, so that was kind of what happened to me. So I became a Calvinist, joined Bethlehem, and then basically shipped out to Bible college, like more or less immediately. Yeah. I managed to get somebody to, believe that I had ministry potential and fill out a recommendation.
So what did you study at Bible college?
So I studied theology.
Okay.
And that's part of my story too, because I actually ended up dropping out of Bible college also.
Oh.
That's part of my I'm disappointed, So I'm disappointed my you're like my new adopted father figure, Paul.
Boy,
So it's very
I'm worried
damaging
about the track record here.
Very damaging for you
We'll
to
see if the elders at Livingstone's meet me on the tarmac when I come back from a mission trip to Africa. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Yeah, weirdly, I don't really view you as my pastor. Like I've had things like that before, where I would tell people that I knew from Bible college that like, oh, like you're my pastor, like, because I would listen to like their sermons creepily, like online or something. And I realized that that's not really a good thing to do, so I stopped. I mean, not listening to sermons online, but telling people that you don't know at all that you only
that they're your pastor.
yeah, I realized it's probably not. Not only is it not accurate, it was probably just not helping.
Pastor, I'm part of your other sheep.
Yeah, it's probably not helping you or them. So yeah, I've never actually viewed you as my pastor. Interestingly, I have viewed you as an intriguing figure. Like I've called you the Francis Schaeffer of the YouTube generation.
Oh my!
Was something that the title I've conferred upon you.
Oh well, I guess being on YouTube will bring titles. So
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a pretty strong analogy there in the sense that you are taking on all comers, and then you walk right into it with your estuary thing, which I guess is maybe it's John Van Donk's estuary thing. It's not really clear like whose estuary thing it is, but
we've got dual custody.
dual custody. Yeah, so he's like your Edith, let's say, and let's not say that, but
let's not say that.
Either way, that's like your Labrie is what I'm trying to say.
That's okay. John Van Donk as my Edith doesn't really work.
Yeah, that might be a stretch.
So we got to speed up this story because even though we got lots of time on the internet, I myself might not have 4 hours. So Bible college, you drop out of Bible college. Why?
Why? Well, so I had an epiphany that God exists in a Starbucks of all things. Interestingly enough, and I've been drinking it ever since.
Wait a minute. You're going to Bible college, and it isn't until you get into a Starbucks that you have an epiphany that God exists. You were skeptical of this while you're in Bible college?
Well, so imagine my surprise, Paul. You think you're surprised. Yeah, well, so that was actually a large part of my leaving, was this sense that, what am I doing here? Because yeah, I had this like sudden realization about the reality of God that was very much a mystical experience. It's difficult to describe. I would say I would.
And you had it in a Starbucks?
Yes, it was right near campus under the L train. So it was a very I guess aesthetically dramatic environment. It's not just your average suburban drive-through Starbucks, Paul. I mean, this is like in the heart of downtown Chicago,
the city that you had a poster up of over your bed. So
exactly, yeah. So I was already primed.
Yes, indeed.
To experience a revelation. But
what provoked this experience?
I think it was just my mulling over the well, actually, I had been thinking a lot about faith and what it is. And I was too impatient, to wait for systematic theology 5 or whatever, to let them tell me. And so I would take like a informal sample of the student population. And I found that, and this is again like stories, I'm an unreliable narrator of even my own story here, right? So this is like my recollection of what happened or what the significance of it was to me. So whether it actually happened precisely this way or is harder to say maybe, but the sense that I have thinking back on it was that I was sort of trying to nail down, at this ecumenical and yet thoroughly evangelical school, what is it? What the hell is the Christian faith? Because my whole objective in going there was to relate it to other people. That was like to be my job, was to actually explain this thing to unsuspecting and faithful, dutiful,
like Pastor Egan and Pastor Piper before you,
like all my great role models. And I was kind of unnerved by the lack of unanimity, I guess, as to what constituted even just faith. Like, never mind anything else. Like, I just started there, and so I had kind of like a faith crisis over the doctrine and definition of faith, I guess, in a little microcosmic sense, in my young greenhorn Bible college student way. And yeah, it was just in sort of trying to reconcile the sometimes I thought mutually exclusive answers that I received within, in theory, the same church and theological tradition, that I had this sort of sudden realization of the reality of God. And I even wrote on this napkin this weird aphorism that, a couple aphorisms. Like, one of them was, God is that which is most real, and by his light he reveals all that is such. And one of them was, faith is the means by which God reveals that which is to whom he wills. And that was sort of my big epiphany, was that faith had a revelatory function. And interestingly, that basic insight, if it is that,
I think they're pretty good. I think they're quite good.
Yeah.
Two little aphorisms. They're very good.
Well, but that insight on faith has really informed my intellectual trajectory ever since. It's not as though I hang my entire Christian religion on this, ecstatic, incommunicable, although, there was a couple of aphorisms that came up, but, this ecstatic, mystical experience. But I can't deny that it has, informed it's just like this basic intuition that I have about the nature of Christian truth that has really been with me ever since. And, maybe that's awkward for my rationalistic tendency or something, but there it is. So what can I say?
So you have an experience that clarifies, and so you no longer need to be at Bible college, so you drop out.
It wasn't that so much as like I realized that I had got to the point of being groomed to take up leadership in the church without, at the time, I felt like any kind of really credible conviction about the reality of God. And that, along with the, later, I would say, theological ambiguity, but that's more kind of I wouldn't say it's revisionist, but that's almost like an anachronism. Because at the time, it was more about me and feeling like, I don't really belong here. Like, I'm not, like, I'm just now become certain about the reality of God. I can't say that I have some.
They didn't ask that on the Moody application. Are you certain about the reality of God? Check yes or no.
I can't say that I have some definitive calling to lead people in the church, which, whatever that is, right? And it's all, so I mean, it just seemed like many orders of magnitude removed from what I was doing, and I just kind of wanted to focus on being a, existentially committed Christian, rather than have this pretense that somehow I'm supposed to lead everybody or whatever. And so in gaining conviction about God, my sense of ministerial vocational calling, I guess, more or less evaporated. And I remember when I was leaving, and this is the other thing. So when my dad came back, it turned out he was like rich. And so he, like, in order to try and buy my love or something, he gave me this credit card when I was going to college, and he was like, I expect you to spend at least $400 a month on this credit. I had no expenses at Moody. So actually, mostly what I did was buy books, like with this money. Like I bought like 16 volumes of John Owen and like all this, which is still yeah. I mean, I would say like I got a pretty good running start on my library from my dad. But I did other things too. Like so, I took this girl on a blind date to the signature room, which is the 98th floor of the Hancock Tower. This is like where people go to propose and stuff. And it was just like some whimsical, like, let's hang out kind of. And Mo was always mad because I used to take people to Smith and Walensky's, which is like a really nice steakhouse on the river there under the Marina Towers. But then I announced that I was leaving. He's like, you never took me to Smith and Walensky's. Really and so years later, I would have to take him and his wife to Smith and Walensky's to kind of compensate for the oversight that he wasn't included in my. But well, it's all that to say, like, so I had this like weird reputation in Bible college as this kind of eccentric, like Richie Rich type personality, like my dad and his new wife, and that was the whole thing because he actually asked me to be the best man in his second wedding, and that was the first time I had met him as an adult. He had like asked me this, which was a little weird. But I did. So I ended up agreeing to it. But that was before I knew that it was the same woman that he had initially cheated on my mother with. That created all this like drama, as you can imagine. Like I said, Paul, there's stories. There's so many stories, and in terms of the interpersonal, socio cultural background of my makeup, it's just like endless, and it is really pretty almost comically melodramatic, I would say, at times. So yeah, it was a crazy thing too, because on her side of the family there was an aunt who was actually the live-in girlfriend of the Lama Kunga, who was the second highest figure in Tibetan Buddhism. So he was like at the wedding, and he had like made this like traditional calligraphy like blessing for them. And it was in this context that like fundamentalist Moody Bible student me is supposed to give like the best man speech. But it was like really awkward for me trying to figure it out. I had like all these sleepless nights trying to figure out how I could like somehow express the gospel in this like hopelessly, at the time, I would regard as sort of pagan, hostile environment, with my father codifying this like adulterous affair and all these things. So I ended up giving a speech that was sort of like vaguely about love, loosely applied to a wedding scenario. And that was like my speech. It ended up being okay, but
you could write a very interesting autobiography.
Yeah.
You've
somebody
got the material.
Somebody asked me if I wrote an autobiography, what it would be called. And I joked that the publisher would want it to be topical for marketing purposes. So it'd be called Artificial Intelligence. And the first line would be, I have always been a hopeless romantic, hell-bent on being an intellectual. But
right.
no,
so you drop out of Bible college.
No intention to write an autobiography, just to be clear. That's not
You've got a few years to wait anyway. So you leave Bible college because now suddenly you have knowledge of God, and you do what with this knowledge?
Well, so I was planning on starting a house church in downtown Minneapolis.
Well, back to the Way International.
Yeah, it's the sins of the fathers, Paul. It's all coming like a dog to its own vomit. There's my family lineage, and see, so you have this like storied, auspicious line in ordained ministry there, and I get this like sort of, half cult, half usury, whatever the hell my family is doing there. Although I guess William Bradford is in there somewhere too, like on my mom's side, so that's pretty okay, maybe. But yeah, so the plan after Bible college was, my dad was intending to induct me into his real estate empire.
Okay.
Which I actually was not interested in, like, at all, unbeknownst to him. So I was kind of playing along.
It didn't seem like he paid a lot of attention to actually the details of your life, so not a big surprise there.
No, well, and so so he had somehow, again, he had so he technically should not have been able to have a broker's license
after what he did.
Yet somehow he wrote the Secretary of State and obtained one. And so, he had developed yet again this real estate empire. And it was all kind of in the family. So his wife was a loan officer, which worked out for me because she got me this no doc subprime loan in 2005 on this inner city house that I had no right ever actually qualified for. But she was the loan officer, and so I kind of sort of slid into this house. The plan, so they wanted me to buy a duplex to maximize my passive income or whatever. But I was like, no, I'm going to buy the house that I feel like I can live in the rest of my life. That was my secret agenda. And so, there was this little 1927 bungalow that we looked at in South Minneapolis, which incidentally now is, noteworthy for being just some 5 blocks from George Floyd Square, of course, that's another story, which I think people are more or less aware of, that my wife and I were actually walking by George Floyd while he was being arrested. So that's another crazy story. You could see Burn Powers. My telling of that story. I should really get into the search engine because there's all these little things, and they're kind of peppered throughout. But my intention was to start a house church with my friend Richard Baxter, who had a great name for it.
A great name for it.
And his father was actually in charge of something like international ministry training for the Baptist General Conference, yet again. And he was also on my floor in Bible college, and he actually left before I did. But he was kind of one of these interesting things. I was an anomaly because everybody was an MK or a PK.
Yeah.
And I was just random guy who willed himself into Bible college in spite of everything kind of thing. But so he was part of this, important evangelical family, and so there were great expectations kind of a thing. But I remember we were having a discussion about the entry essays for Moody, and as one of the requirements back then anyway was you had to want to go into full-time vocational ministry.
Sure.
And so I remember asking him what he had said he wanted to do in his entrance essay, and he was I think his exact words were, I think it might be cool to do linguistics. It was the most non-committal state. So not surprisingly, he ended up leaving because he didn't really care to begin with. But he was a really interesting guy, and of all the people I've known in my life, he's probably the most like me, I think, temperamentally. We just had this kind of intuitive awareness of where each other were coming from, just effortlessly kind of a thing. Well, so I was hey, this is great. We're both on our way out of Bible college. We can, and we had a lot of maybe ill-formed, naive ideas about non-institutional ecclesiology, which I gather you flirted with yourself.
I did. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd be interested to hear that, but I know it's not about you, Paul. It's
not about me.
Well, so long story short, I bought the house and then he moved to the Philippines, which kind kind of screwed me up because, then I'm stuck with this house here and my dad who expects me to like join his empire, which I had like no intention of doing, but I didn't really have the wherewithal within me to do this myself. And so then it entered this kind of dark period where I just tried to like make the house work financially, because as I had described, it was already like way more house than I had like any right to have. And so I ended up like renting out the rooms to all kinds of like crazy pagan people. And a Labrie it was not. Like let's just put it that way. Like whatever the hell it was not a Christian study center. And so I ended up actually getting like $14,000 in debt because I had like no financial management concept at all. And I had to sign a quitclaim deed to my father and move back in with my mom just to like pay off my debt. It was like an extremely demoralizing. So there was like 5 years of this like black hole where I was working like 2 jobs. Like I was delivering pizza like at night, and I actually got robbed twice. There's so many stories, Paul. So many stories. Like the time I got maced and was temporarily blinded, like delivering for Pizza Hut. And I like, dropped the pizzas and I ran off into this intersection. And these like 4 people who had, maced me just then, I just remember one of them was like, "Why'd you run, bro?" And I'm like, "Why the hell do you think you just fucking blinded me? Like, what am I supposed to do? Stick around to see what you do next?" So I just remember it was funny because he's like, it's like he's surprised, like, "Hey, we were supposed to rob you. Like, why are you leaving?"
This is the narrative. This is the liturgy. This is the robbing liturgy, and you broke it.
Yeah, well, and I remember like being in the center of this intersection, Franklin Avenue and Portland, there in South Minneapolis, and I'm wearing my Pizza Hut uniform. I got like my Pizza hat on, and I can't see like anything. I go to this car that stopped at a red light, and meanwhile they're like rummaging through my Mazda protege that my uncle had given me for free that I was using to deliver pizza. And I asked this guy, a random dude in a car, like, "Can you take me to the hospital?" I'm blind. And then he's like, "Oh, sorry." And then the light turns green and everybody drives away. There were like 5 cars and they all just leave me there. And they're like, "Wow, that's great." And so then I remembered I had my cell phone and I called, and I just remember the ambulance came and they're like flushing out my eyes in the back of the ambulance. And it was this, I just remember there's this British guy and he's like, "You're taking your life in your own hands delivering pizza in this neighborhood." And I was like, "This is my neighborhood. What are you talking about? I live here." So that was something. And it really was like that too, because I also worked for as a 911 operator for a while. And I remember when I told them where I lived, they're like, "Oh, you're right down there by Crack Alley." They're like, "Thanks, that's great."
Well, you had intentions of being a light in the darkness and all those things. You just wound up being a victim.
Where the people are hurting.
That's right. And go and hurt with them, which is exactly what you did.
I excelled at that.
All right, we got if we're gonna have any time for you to ask me what you want to ask me, we gotta get you at least to some point here. So how on earth did you find me?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure like you, because it wasn't the Jordan Peterson.
It wasn't through Jordan Peterson. I remember that.
It wasn't Jordan Peterson. Somehow or other, one of your videos appeared in my feed. And I don't even remember like what it was or how or why, but I quickly realized that you were like this Dutch Reformed, which is like specifically my adopted, well, one half of my adopted theological tradition, in particular under the auspices of Dooyeweerd. Not that you're Dooyeweerdian or something, but the point is
I very seldom mention Herman Dooyeweerd on my channel. Very seldom.
Which is a shame, really. but I have heard you talk about Kuiper and
There
you
are
know
people around me who talk about Doivard,
and Bavinck and
Bavinck,
all the people that I read for fun,
all the neo-Calvinist lights.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, what happened to me was when I was in Bible college, I was like, one of the many impetuous thoughts that I had was, hey, I should write a book. So, because I had this epiphany, right? Like, people need to know. Hey, people need to know this thing.
Don't hide your light under a bushel.
Well, and so I thought, like, hey, I'm going to write this book about the reality of God. Never mind the fact that I have yet to receive any formal training on the, many centuries of complex intellectual tradition. I felt like I was ready. And I was going to call this book The God Who Is. And so
Let me
naturally,
write that down.
naturally, I thought, hey, I should Google my title just to make sure some jerk hasn't written something like that, right? And sure enough, there's some guy, Francis Schaeffer, who wrote this book, The God Who Is There, which I thought was pretty redundant, actually.
That's right. You didn't need the word there. You
Yeah,
could have just stopped it at is.
It's gratuitous. So I'm like, who is this clown? And so, so I dutifully got the book. And and that was actually what began my intellectual journey, was like, when my college career was like imploding, but my interest in theology was exploding at the same moment. And like so many fundamentalists before me, it really started with Schaeffer introducing me to a larger intellectual world. But I wasn't satisfied with that for, well, a variety of reasons. Like, well, and I actually like owe a huge debt to Schaeffer because he put me on both of my tracks intellectually. Um, Doivard, although probably like in spite of Schaeffer, because he never really like mentions Doivard, or even Van Til, who, by the way, he was a student of. But if you read True Spirituality, you would get the impression that he was just spontaneously pacing in a barn, and this entire fully developed presuppositional apologetic just came to him.
Just like at your Starbucks.
Yeah, just like that.
Only more.
But even more so, yeah. That's the impression that you would get. But yeah, one way or another, I went on the Dutch Reformed route. I went from the, talk about pipelines. I went from the Schaeffer, Van Til, Doivard pipeline. But then Schaeffer also had his little analysis of the trajectory of Western culture. And he talked about this weird, eccentric Danish thinker as Schaeffer called him, the first to go below the line of despair. Oh. And so me being the contrarian that I was, I thought, well, this is somebody I have to pay attention to, because Schaeffer's basically saying, like, this guy's okay for like, pietistic devotional reading, but you don't really want to, like, there's nothing to see here, people. But so with the ringing endorsement of the first to go below the line of despair began a long love affair with Kierkegaard, the other thing behind me here.
Yes.
And it got pretty intense. In fact, it turns out that Minnesota is home to the largest collection of Kierkegaard-related materials outside of Copenhagen. Wow. Because Edna and Howard Hong, who were the couple who translated the Princeton paperback series, were based at St. Olaf College, which is where the Kierkegaard library is, and actually ended up attending Howard Hong's funeral. So I've like sort of ensconced myself in this Kierkegaardian world as a kind of honorary Lutheran, I guess, maybe in a kind of politic existentialist sense. And then I've sort of adopted neo-Calvinist tradition a la Doivard as well. But it all tied back to Schaeffer and the fact that he ripped off my great idea. And he also died in Rochester, Minnesota, the same year that I was born, in 1984. because he was actually getting treated at the Mayo Clinic.
Wow.
And that's why there's a Labrie there. In fact, it's the headquarters, I think, still.
Really?
The administrative headquarters is in Rochester.
Well, I began this video worried I wasn't going to get enough stories, but
it's like
I had,
this is the filibuster. This is the filibuster. But you induced it. It's like you might as well you just stuck your fingers down my throat. and here we are, Paul. This is the mess that you've created. And I don't know who's listening to this or what they intend.
Or if they're still listening, but here we are.
Yeah. I was going to open with the fact that, well, again, I find myself as this kind of accidental progressive. And I've established now, through many autobiographical details that I'm something of a contrarian. And so I occupy these spaces, but I never really commit myself to any of them, which doesn't mean that I'd like to think, can't participate. And that's what appeals to me about the space that has emerged around you, is that it is such a genuinely pluralistic space. And I mean that in the best possible sense of the word. I don't mean pluralism mistaken for perennialism, but I mean a genuine pluralism which actually accommodates a genuine diversity of thought. At least that's what I value about this little corner of the internet. And it's what, dismays me about both the conservative OPC, where as far as I know, I'm still listed in the bulletin as an apostate, and the mainline Presbyterian church, where, it's like incidentally Christian.
Wow. I think you're really onto something there.
I find myself in something that I think of as a kind of Christian diaspora. And I don't think I'm the only one. I think there's actually a growing number of people who have deep-seated Christian convictions, but can't quite make their home unreservedly in the extant Christian church in the West. Now, it's not to say they can't participate in its church life and its programmatics, but there's a deep uneasiness there that causes us in the Christian diaspora, if you will, to long for a more pure, visible manifestation of the church universal. And, that runs the gamut from, super naive people like me trying to start a house church without any kind of knowledge at all, to, lifelong ordained ministers who become disaffected or disillusioned in one way or another. Dare I say John Van Donk may even be part of this Christian diaspora. I don't know.
I think he definitely is.
I actually starting a channel dealing with that theme, actually sort of inviting people to discuss their own sort of disaffection or disillusionment while still maintaining an existential identification with their received Christianity, even if they couldn't quite participate in it the way that it was given to them. And I even got permission from Grim Grizz to use his VNA bubble. Yeah, so that was a major coup. Although he did say that if it did not succeed in making people feel virtually not alone, that, the assassins would succeed, and I couldn't use it anymore. So. Kind of a double-edged sword there, but yeah, where I was going to go with it is, just kind of feeling dismayed about the nature of the conversation around the CRC and how, and yeah, from my more kind of latently progressive standpoint, I guess. In this is funny because it's all relative. Because in this context, I'm like a crazy, wide-eyed liberal. But over there, I'm like a crazy, wide-eyed fundamentalist.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is my strange situation, Paul. So so I wanted to kind of, I don't know, maybe by way of like shock exposure therapy or something, kind of introduce myself as a bona fide progressive member of the little corner, because I do identify particularly as a liberal Protestant theologically, but I would characterize that as like a classical liberal in the sense that I'm not with like Hicks, and speaking of like the myth of the incarnation or something like that. I, for the most part, embrace the contours of historical orthodoxy. But I do believe in my own kind of narrative as a Protestant that the most salient issue in the Protestant Reformation was in fact a philosophical one. There were, of course, socio-political issues, there were obviously theological issues and ecclesiological issues, of course. But I think the philosophical issue is maybe what Tillich identifies as the Protestant principle. And that's the part where some years ago, when I first entered the corner, I kind of chastised you for suggesting that the protest had to end and pointed out that the protest can't end if what the protest is the philosophical rejection of any attempt to usurp divine authority. And that's how I think of Protestantism. That's how I identify as a Protestant. So I see the purpose of the Reformation philosophically was to wrest divine authority away from the ecclesiastical institution. And the way that that was effected was to push it back into Scripture. And the reason that I identify as a liberal Protestant is, I think, with liberal theologians, that after 500 years of Protestantism, we've now seen that that move was necessary indeed, but insufficient. And I'm with the Christocentric tradition in liberal theology that seeks to push that authority back further into the person of Christ. That's more or less where I'm.
That's really good. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, that's more or less where I'm coming from. But out of that place, it makes me somewhat of a unicorn, I think. I'm kind of like that Randall guy from Portland who's always going on the Capturing Christianity channel. Which is a weird name for a channel, because it's like, now that you've held Christianity hostage, it's like, who are you ransoming and what are the demands? That was never really clear to me. But there's this poor liberal theology professor who's always like on there. His name's like Randall something. And he's kind of like the foil, He's like, oh, progressives aren't so bad, and and you guys have to kind of like moderate here.
Wait, the Capturing Christianity, that's the guy who, he's always got Muslims
This
on his
is the
channel
guy.
too?
This is the guy who declared that he was running a statistical assessment to determine the probability that, quote, the papacy is true. This is that guy.
Huh.
Don't get me started on the merits of that project, because we don't have enough time for that story.
Yeah, someone pointed me to a couple of his videos, and I watched some of his videos, and I just was unsure about a whole lot of things after watching his channel. I'm sure there's fans of his channel out there, and that's fine. But
yeah, no, I mean, it's not like the worst thing in the world, but just the idea that
yeah,
you could somehow bracket all of the questions about the truth of Christianity and then quantify the statistical probability that the papacy is true.
well, I don't
Like, to
even
me,
know
it just
what that
reminds me of
means.
my friend ran a karate school, and he said that, you get these like martial arts magazines, and they're always these like absurd articles. And one of them he said was how to use martial arts to defend against a hand grenade. And I remember him saying, you know, if that's what you're doing, too many things have already gone wrong. That's kind of how I feel about let's quantify the probability of the papacy being true. It's like too many things have gone wrong if that's where you're at. Like, but yeah,
Wow.
I've been listening to the conversation around sex and gender, and you know, my wife and I actually identify as asexual. So technically, we're in the alphabet soup
Okay.
of the people that, you know, that
Well,
are.
Nate warned me you were gonna come into this conversation. So let's have it.
Oh well, I mean, I guess I'm just.
You keep talking. I'm gonna fiddle with some things. I had 2 hours with Richard Rowland already this morning, so it's been a busy morning, so I gotta replenish a little. So keep talking. I hear you.
Okay, that's not weird at all. But but focus.
Hey. We've got a grim grizz here. You can handle me refreshing my drink.
Yeah, no, it's fine. This gives me a chance to inspect all the formerly out of focus debris on your table. But yeah, I mean, basically, my wife and I, we've been married for, it will be 12 years next month. We okay, so content warning. There may be sexually, if not explicit, suggestive discussion that is not perhaps suitable for immature audiences. So
Well,
viewer discretion.
you already warned us you went to the adult service and it's panning out. So keep going.
Viewer discretion is advised. But yeah, basically what happened was my wife and I, on our wedding night, we dutifully attempted to consummate our marriage. It was awkward, not unpleasant, because we were thoroughly lubricated at that point from dinner and such. But it was awkward and we weren't really into it. So we, you know, effectively failed to achieve consummation that evening. And then this is where I guess the rest of the story just kind of fills in. We just never tried again. We just never attempted again. And it was basically like years later that we realized that we just didn't care, I guess. And at some point, like a couple of years ago, we started to kind of think of ourselves as at least, you know, having some sort of affinity in our experience with what is described as asexuality. Now, that does not mean that I have, you know, ideologically endorsed some sort of neo-Marxist or other rationalistic, you know, heavy-handed description of human nature or sexuality or something, but it does happen to fit our anecdotal experience, which I would not in any way present as a norm or to be, you know, to construct an entire monolithic civilization on. But the way I kind of think of it is almost in a kind of Doriverdian sense of unfolding complexity of God's latent possibilities within creation, such that these diverse sexual expressions that are, you know, have become the kind of political and social football that they have, I wonder if they are not further disclosures of the creative possibilities that God has placed within his cosmogonic order. That's kind of how I think about it theologically. No, I have a lot of idiosyncratic reasons for relativizing the much assumed scriptural teaching on sexuality. But mostly, I guess my issue, so we had this experience that I just described, and it wasn't really until our 10th wedding anniversary that we kind of like looked at each other and we're like, it's kind of weird. And we just like not only never had sex, but never really cared to have sex. Like it wasn't like some traumatic thing. It wasn't like we were seeking marriage counseling. It's not like it was like driving us apart or something. I mean, initially it was kind of in the back of our minds, like in the early years, but we didn't have this deontological expectation, much less the innate drive to do that. And we were not intending to have children, so it just wasn't something we were interested in. And that was essentially our experience. And it wasn't until we thought of it as corresponding almost like incidentally to this asexual thing that I started to kind of rethink my own views, I guess, of homosexuality and all the rest of it. Because I didn't really care. I was more interested in, frankly, Christian philosophical problems, like inscrutable Christian philosophical problems that have plagued the intellectual tradition. And still, I'm still more interested in those things. But and that's why, I'm not doing the, what is his name? David Sint, I think, thing, and holding up a sign that's like, is anyone else here asexual? He was the first openly gay minister in the Mainline Presbyterian Church, and he went to the General Assembly and just held up a sign, is anyone else here gay? Now, this was like 1974, I think. So, but the reason I don't do that is because that's not my issue. My issue is the reality of God, the living creator God, who is love personified in the historical Jesus Christ. That's my issue. And so, yes, I incidentally identify, as asexual to the extent to which that has a, discernible, graspable content. And as such, yeah, I have a kind of sympathy and even perhaps understanding for people who have more definitive, let's say, sexy sexual orientations. And being asexual, if I can speak of myself that way, is weird because you kind of like don't fit in either thing.
Yeah.
Like there was a gay pride parade in Australia and the asexual contingent came up and people were haranguing them saying, you guys are no fun. so they get it from both sides, it's like, what's wrong with you people? Like so I mean we occupy this awkward kind of liminal space, but I know how you feel about coming out in the secret sacred self, so God forbid I come on Paul Vanderklay's channel and make myself some lightning rod of it, because this is going to be the thing that sets off my meteoric rise, Paul. This is gonna be it, Paul.
Well, at least you're safe from Dr. Egan's temptation.
Yeah, no, it's true. Although, one can never know.
Well, there are many Christian saints over the years that would have aspired to have been asexual.
Well, that's the other interesting thing. Yeah, there's a sense in which our sexual ethic is actually more similar to a lot of the historical roots than even, the focus on the family or what have you. But mostly it's been interesting for me as a kind of foil because, like, so take like the Don't Say Gay bill, or the whole controversy over exposing students, I'm not going to say children, but students to this gender ideology or the notion of a more expansive, fluid spectrum as it relates to sexuality. I think there is a lot of, I wonder if it's not unjustified fear about, say, like social contagion. I'm not saying social contagion isn't a thing or isn't something to worry about, but I think there's a lot of perhaps hysteria overestimating the possibility of it. Because, for example, like if you sat down a bunch of teenagers in a sex ed class with like raging hormones and suggested to them, hey, it's possible to be asexual, I don't think anybody would believe that some of them would delude themselves into thinking that they were, and somehow just not engage in any kind of sexual experimentation or have experienced any sexual attraction. So my question is, if it's so obviously not transferable by suggestion for asexuality, why is it so intuitive for people to think that everybody's going to think they're gay or trans or something? And I just wonder about that. I mean, it's not an argument, it's just something. So I think asexuality is an interesting kind of foil to kind of look at the whole issue, and it's the one that I happen to occupy, so I can't help I can't help holding it up that way.
Well, it is, because it's also different from celibacy, yes, which in practice is asexual, but is renunciatory in the sense that because the asexual has nothing to renounce.
There. Exactly. Yeah. I just have and that's also interesting from the, moralistic, pietistic, theological perspective, because our sin is like a sin of omission, which is a little bit, if anything, and that's it's a little bit softer,
Well, if you were one of Judah's sons, and you just sat down with Tamar and said, I'm asexual, so, I mean, there's
something different about it. But I mean, I guess part of my purpose of, emerging or whatever in the midst of this conversation is, there's a contrarian thing. Because, I couldn't help but notice that there does happen to be a significant backlash against that entire population. So this is the moment, it seems to me, to say, oh yeah, I'm with those
people. This is our moment.
Yeah, like, oh, everybody hates these people now. Oh, okay, I better identify.
You can have the A parade. We're not into any of you.
So
you would very severely tempt a world of people who would find this orientation to be a challenge to overcome.
Oh yeah, it's already happened. Well, Jacob, is convinced that we're going to name our children after him. So it's get in line. It's there's no shortage of people who are designing their conversion therapies to cure us now. So that's cool. I'll audit your class. I don't mind. And hey, maybe it'll work out. I don't know. I have no vested interest in remaining asexual. It just happens to be something that is an apt imperial description of my anecdotal experience.
Well, I have a lot of these conversations, as you well know, and there are very few of them in which it seems I get to a point that I think I can't be surprised any further, and then it happens again. And that has been this conversation. Yeah. Your life it's quite an amazing life so far. Yeah, just getting started. well, just by the fact that it's happened already sort of leads one to imagine it's going to keep happening. That just seems to be how you are.
It's that Chinese blessing, live in interesting times, right?
Yeah, given an interesting life. Well,
so I wanted to, because this is something, or at least that aspect. I mean, yeah, you're referring to other aspects of my story also, but because that aspect was so maybe unfathomable to some people, that somebody could be so interested in adjacent to Vanderklay and his Dutch Reformed Calvinism, with like the meaning crisis and bringing to bear overt Christian philosophical remedies, and yet, in any sense whatsoever, see themselves as also adjacent to whatever the hell the inverted clown show, the world's on fire, that with all of the interesting descriptions of those people who, yes, I do in some sense see also as my people. They they didn't ask me to be part of them, but here I am anyway. But I felt like it was important, because like Bethel McGrew, who I met with you in Chicago, I have a lot of love and respect for her. But so we are on Twitter, and and all as all good stories where things go awry begin, like on Twitter, right? I was following her on Twitter, and at one point, just like seemingly out of nowhere, she notes that, of course, people who are incapable, she said, of consummating their marriage don't have valid marriages, or something to that effect. And I'm sitting there reading this, like, what the hell, like Bethel McGrew? And I was really tempted, because I don't know if you remember that infamous John Piper tweet to Rob Bell.
Yeah.
Which Piper had not even read. And he said, "Farewell, Rob Bell." I
Farewell, Rob
almost
Bell.
tweeted, "Fuck you, Bethel McGrew." But somehow I restrained myself. If for no other reason than I hadn't had this video and it wouldn't have made any sense.
So this whole conversation is to set up a tweet?
There are things like that, though, is my point, is that, occupying this little corner, whatever the hell it is, like there's a certain level of discourse that is, and this is all cliche stuff from the CRC, so I know people have heard it before, but, it's otherizing, it's demonizing, it's dehumanizing, it's all of these things.
Well, and like hardly anybody ever gets all the way around to your letter. LGBTQIA, and then you just have to wonder, is that my A, or is there some other A that takes precedent in the line?
I was at the FBI booth at Pride Festival, which I've never gone to Pride ever. But we have a bisexual friend, and we I was like, hey, what the hell? We should just go to Pride. Let's go to Pride. Why not? This is our carnival, right? So might as well check it out. And the FBI had infiltrated in plain sight. They had a booth inviting people to, sign up to become agents and things. So I'm not sure. It was kind of weird. It was a little weird. I'm not sure why the FBI had an official booth, but they had all these stickers. And this guy's like, oh, we're looking for the asexual sticker, because he's always trying to make us feel welcome or whatever. And the one that they sort of landed on was demisexual. And I'm like, what the hell is that? So it's like, we don't even have our flag has already been colonized by some other nuance, So I mean, these are the travails of being part of the ever expanding diversification. You think you got your identity, you got your A, if it's a scarlet letter, whatever it is, at least it's there. But then, somebody else has got it now. And so you can't even rely on that, Paul. You can't even rely on that. I really wanted to talk to you about the strategic ambiguity in Protestant churches with regards to ecclesiology, and how that phenomenon is aggravating the already arduous emotional dynamics of what's happening in the CRC. That's why I really wanted to talk, because church, I think, has to be one of the most equivocal words in the English language. And theologians, and I think, church institutions, I really do think that they take advantage of that, to varying degrees of self-awareness. But it's not really helping anybody, least of all, the public witness. And intellectual credibility of Christianity through time in a post-Christian Western world. That was one of the things I wanted to talk about.
That's a
You
big
stuck your
topic.
fingers down my throat, Paul, and then all the autobiography vomited everywhere. And so here we are now in the last 5. Do you know what this is? This is like George Lucas at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and suddenly everything's got to be a new hope. Nothing is like that at all. The aesthetics are all completely different. And in the last 5 minutes of the movie, we're all caught up. Everybody's British. All the technology is like 1970s. None of it is explained. So this is the position you put me in, Paul. I have like 5 minutes to somehow tie everything together. And for me, that was actually punctuated because my screening of episode 3, the film broke right before those 5 minutes. And so we were all like, oh my goodness, this is the most incredible movie we've ever seen. And the clerk, the attendant, he tried to warn us. He was like, oh, there's not that much more left. It's not really that. But then, so there was this wait. There was like a 20-minute wait. They repaired the film. The last 5 minutes ran. It was all the like, we got to get caught up. We got to get caught up. And it was more punctuated than I think any other person's viewing was. And I swear, at the end, when the credits rolled, there was this guy, it was total silence. And there was this one guy who just yelled out, "What the hell?" Because that was not the ending we were expecting. It was not what we were expecting. Well, I kind of feel like this conversation is a little bit like that. What the hell? What the hell? But it's okay. I had books I was going to recommend. I had a whole thing, Paul. It was beautiful. It was
I feel like I owe you another, CW. I feel like I owe you another. So fortunately, if the Lord tarries and gives me strength, we can do another. Yeah, and because I even, I always shoot, where is it? I look down.
Is that Clouser, the blue? The
yes,
dark blue.
Wait, where is it?
The dark blue right there. It's like 4th in from the left on the second to the bottom shelf. Oh, you got another one. Oh, yeah. That's a way earlier edition. Yeah, Myth of Religious Neutrality. I would love to have a reading group of that book with interested parties in this little corner. I would love to do that. Even if it's just the first part disambiguating the nature of religious belief, I think it is it's so elucidating to understanding our current situation. And that's really what Roy does masterfully in that book, is disambiguate Neuwirth's notion of religious ground motive. But Roy,
there are newer editions of this?
Yeah. There's a second edition, but then there's like a 2.5 edition that isn't officially recognized, but it's kind of negligible changes.
I feel like I have to owe you. I just owe you an apology because I've, here you had, you had all these expectations, and look what I've done to your conversation.
That was my mistake. I should have no expectation. I mean, I didn't think it was bad.
But we had a lovely experience, and just in that pie place, remember that on the way back from Thunder Bay?
I feel like you took Laurel's idea about making the estuaries a cohort throughout the weekend. Did you? Or
whose idea?
So Laurel at Betty's Pies, coming off of Thunder Bay, she observed that the estuary was really impactful, but it might have been more impactful if you had a cohort that went through and met repeatedly throughout the conference.
No, that was Van Donk's idea. So
he's another Schaefer. He's still stealing these ideas.
No, that's right.
Well, incidentally, Laurel also had that idea and told you about it.
Yeah.
And you forgot, and then Van Dunk independently did it anyway.
Well, that's to her credit.
That's what we call the Spirit of God.
Indeed. Oh.
Well, I'm glad I made you laugh. That was like, I knew it would happen, but I wasn't sure where it would hit on the meter.
Well, I do have a question to ask. Do you still have your Surface Duo?
Yes.
Is it still working?
Yes. Should it not be?
No, no, no. I just know that, there've been subsequent updates that have sort of messed it up, and Microsoft has abandoned the project. And so I just, you showed me that Surface Duo up there in Thunder Bay, and I was all yeah, even with the cover on it. That's so cool. I've shopped, I've tinkered with buying one, but it's like I don't really need it. But
so in case people need to establish my credibility in this space as sufficiently progressive, this is a Communist Party of China emblem. I'm not going to explain that. I'm just going to note that. Also, I, for some reason, am a card-carrying member of the NAACP. It just showed up one day in the mail. I don't know why, but I was like, okay, I'll take it.
Maybe witnessing the George Floyd arrest was sufficient.
Apparently so. Yeah, they're like, you're an honorary member now. Yeah.
Oh.
So I just didn't want people to think that I was, appropriating progressivism or something.
But I think you have, and I'm going to edit this video, and I'm going to lead it off.
You never edit videos, Paul. You never edit videos.
I don't, but only on very special occasions when.
Because you don't want the algorithm. So somebody said in the comments section that I was the Roy Kent of the little corner, which I didn't know what that was until I watched Ted Lasso. And he's this character who just like gratuitously uses profanity, which I do. So, and I was like,
I've never seen you gratuitously use profanity.
That's because you're from New Jersey and you didn't notice the like 2 F-bombs I've already
yeah, there were.
Conversation. You weren't scandalized at all. So.
I wasn't scandalized at all. I am from New Jersey, so. Oh,
I thought that was why you were gonna bleep me or something.
No. I think you put your finger on one of the real essences of what's going on, and I thought I want to put that up front so people don't miss it. And I want people to watch the whole conversation, and they really should. If they don't, they're really missing out. This is one of my favorites. I mean, this conversation has been. I'm a little dumbstruck by the whole thing.
Paul, do your children ever say we can't all be your favorites, Dad? Do they ever say that?
No,
because they know what they're.
Well, my sisters know that I was the favorite. So
when are you doing the epic crossover with the primitive home? I kept thinking this is obvious cross-promotional opportunity. You could tour the bungalow. You have the historical tie-in that this is where DeVries lived. I mean, what is happening? What is the holdup here? I really don't understand why
the problem with my poor sister is she's even higher in openness than I am and lower in conscientiousness, which means she gets bored quicker. And so the primitive home thing might even just all go away when she goes and does some other even more nerdy YouTube things that nobody watches. But
I was really hoping for like the Vanderklay extended YouTube universe. I thought that was gonna be a thing. Like,
if my younger sister had lived, that she had just started a podcast, and my younger sister is more progressive than I am. And so she had just started a podcast with her daughter, who her daughter's just like her. And so
more progressive than you are? You mean? just like in that sense?
No, her daughter is a high school English teacher too. Her daughter is their middle child. Their daughter is a lot like my sister. So anyway, I'll not that my nieces and nephews are going to watch any of this. The only ones who ever watch any of it, Jared will watch something sometimes, and I think Benny's watched a couple of things, but I think my daughters and my oldest son. I don't think they've watched any of it. My wife doesn't watch any of this. So,
yeah, that's the perils of being a content creator. You just alienate those closest to you.
I don't identify as a content creator. I'm rather miffed because YouTube keeps sending me things to content creators, and I say, that's not me. I am not a content creator.
Yeah, I noticed your like super meta commentary about the system notes you received from the back end of YouTube on Twitter. Like you're always like, this is what YouTube thinks of me?
That's exactly right. I do not identify as I mean, I don't even have an alphabet to stand with. There's no parade for those who make YouTube videos and are not content creators.
Not yet, Paul. Not yet. Mr. Beast will make it happen just because he said that. And they'll be blowing money on the crowd. It's gonna be incredible.
Oh, CW. What this I have two simultaneous fears for this conversation. The first is that hardly anyone will watch it, and the second is that it will break the internet, and they're both my fears. So who knows? Maybe
I have a dedicated in-ground fiber line, so it's not going to break my internet. I made damn sure of that.
Hey, and what happened to the well, we're still waiting on the Minneapolis estuary to emerge.
Yeah, you know, I realized so Luke had contacted me and he was like, do you not use Signal anymore? Because he created a Signal group for the Twin Cities estuary. And I was like, oh, like somehow I was in some other like annoying thing and I just like turned off all notifications. And so I logged in there. I got like 700 messages from the Twin Cities estuary channel. I was like, oops. So yeah, I mean, I'm not the most upstanding member at this
Well, the thing about Minneapolis is you guys have some really great potential. You got Paul Anleitner there. You got you got Luke. I mean, in terms of metropolitan areas in America, you're just a little south of Thunder Bay. You guys have super potential, and
it's just like Lake Wobegon. You know, when it comes to cult of personalities, we're above average here.
That's right. Indeed, you are. Indeed, you are. Well, I hate to bring this thing to a close, but I have been doing this for over 4 hours today, and I don't know if
it's too long.
It's not too long.
You gotta pace yourself.
I felt bad because you're like, we've never done this. And I'm like, crap, there's so many others that are still also kind of waiting in the wings. And so it's like, okay, I got to get busy now. So let's get CW. And your calendar was easy. You said anytime you want. I said, great. CW on the calendar.
I was trying to be accommodating. You sent me like some gif of this woman blushing. I was like, you act as if not everybody accommodates your schedule.
No,
you're the VIP. How can I be like, oh, I'm only available?
Sometimes people like, oh, I can't get a rando slot. Okay. All right. Well,
and then they're like, but it can only be for these 45 minutes.
Exactly. It's like 3 a.m. on a full moon.
Yeah, on the solstice.
That's right. And like, well, I don't think I can make that work. Oh,
yeah.
You're not paying me to do this, dude. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, but don't act shocked. You're a pastor of a small urban church, so this is like your everyday life thing.
It's true. I love it when people call me at 11:15 while I'm in church, and it's like, where did you think I would be? You're obviously not here right now. Why do you think I'm available? So,
yeah.
There are many interesting ironies to my life. So,
well, it was good. I guess maybe we'll pick up the thread.
We'll have to pick up the thread.
The thread I intended to pull.
There are so many books because I really enjoyed this book, and he had a more popular book too.
Well, maybe not in terms of sales, but he had a more less technical book, Knowing with the Heart. which
That
I
wasn't the
believe
one I
has
read.
now been republished as "Can We Know God Is Real" or something like that.
That's like right up your alley.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I love Roy. Like, I was trying to get you to talk to him, but I mean, I think that's part of the hazard of your job. You have to kind of have like a really over aggressive filter. It's like when people are suggesting, like, you should talk to, you're just like that's when you start to tune out because if you even like entertain the possibility of everything people think you should do, then you would
Oh
never
yeah.
be able to think about anything else. So,
No, it's true.
I mean, I get it. I get it. But Roy's not going to be with us much longer. I would love to see you talk to him.
Well, the thing about chasing someone like this down is that
He's like in his 80s. He's not going to go very fast.
but
He's
I
not going to
what
get
I
away, Paul.
I don't the reason I don't like hunt down many celebrity conversations is because
I think he'd be flattered that you view him as a celebrity. I think he'd be
well, he
flattered.
wrote a book, so that's
He wrote
something.
a book. Lots of people write books, Paul. I mean,
Yeah.
although that book does have the distinction, most academic literature goes out of print in 5 years. That book has been in print for decades in multiple editions now. So
Oh, that's pretty good.
there's something about that book. Yeah.
But I like to have conversations within relationships. So, you and I have chatted and Bridges of Meaning. You've been on live streams. I've had pie with you in the state of Minnesota. You showed me your Surface Duo, which I thought was really cool because I think they're really cool, even though they're, I actually built computers and ran OS2 for a while. I'm like I usually back technological losers. So, and so I like it. To me, it's way more fun having conversations with people that you can at least have some hope of having something of a relationship with, because just like this conversation, I mean, we only scratched the surface of the interesting things in your life. We only and what a bonanza it was.
I know. Yeah, I mean that's why I don't like to talk about autobiography, because it's like, what do I what do I say? Like which meta narrative of my own experience do you want? What's the emphasis you're looking for? Because I could probably cobble together something that would suit, in a compelling narrative. So
And so then I think, I'm going to talk to this guy about his book. Now, if I reread the book and I get super interested in it, I might go ahead and, send him an email and land him, because I got a couple conversations like that. But like
yeah,
I talked to,
if you have the bandwidth and you just want to like put out there, hey, whoever wants to read this book, however infrequent, like once every 3 months or something, we'll like talk about this part of it. I would totally be there for that. And then yeah, maybe you could parlay that into a conversation with Roy or something. If he's still alive by the time all that happens, which is not guaranteed at all.
But to me, these conversations have to have a telos. And to me, the telos,
context. And
yes.
When the hell are you going to eulogize Tim Keller?
I know.
It's kind of a disgrace at this point.
Disgrace.
Not to pile on or anything.
No, and I should.
I know how important he's been to.
Tim Keller was really important to me. I mean, in many ways, Tim Keller. It was funny because it was after I went to New York and met him, and See,
I didn't even know that story. I didn't even know you met him. See?
I was in his apartment, met his wife, the whole 9 yards.
That sounds like a good story.
And it was after that he actually had the impact in my life, and it had nothing to do with him meeting him. It had everything to do with where I was, and I was a hair's breadth away from burnout. I was in bad shape. And
So you say it had nothing to do with your meeting him, but you've also just said that these conversations need a telos. I mean, is it possible that his preaching ministry needed a telos too? And having met the man, I mean, is there any sense in which it made you more receptive? Because it's kind of
well,
hard to believe that.
I
Like,
you
I
know
guess it's not like an
actually
A to
I
B.
actually so I went to his conference because my buddies, the guys, the church planting group, my buddies here in Sacramento, one
The
of
peer
them,
pressure.
Tim Blackman, who I'm going to have on the channel. Tim Blackman had an in, and Tim Blackman's like, let's go to New York City. And then we've also had a way of finding other people to pay for our things. And so the four of us flew to New York. We stayed in a cool place. We
What
had
year
good
was
meals.
this?
What's that?
What year was this?
2006.
Okay.
And I hadn't been back to the New York area since the 90s, early 90s. And I hadn't lived there since the early 80s. And so my buddies are like, you're going to be our guide to New York. And I got to New York and it's like, everything's different. You know,
even the Twin Towers were gone by then.
I know the Twin Towers were gone. They didn't have tokens in the subway anymore. It's like, anyway. So we were there and we got to, there's this tiny little secret conference that Keller would do sometimes for certain people. And so we got to talk to Tim and ask him questions and meet other people, staff at the church. And then like the climax was like this evening of Chinese food with him and his wife in their apartment with a few other people. And, it was totally cool. And then we went to church on Sunday and heard him preach, yada, yada, yada. And my whole thing was, it's interesting. And it wasn't until a couple of months later that I was really in bad shape and I started listening to Tim Keller recordings, MP3s. And then I did there were 3 years that I'd listened to 2, 3, 4 Tim Keller recordings a day. I mean, just hard into it.
So in a weird way, you were like a prototype for a large swath of your current audience. In terms of like binging this kind of content.
Yes. And so then it sort of happened. Well, I wasn't burned out when I found Peterson, but Peterson was just fascinating. And that really caught my attention. And I couldn't find conversation partners. So that's why I made my video. And I thought I'd find a few conversation partners, but I didn't expect this. So, but what you said about this little corner, I think is true. It is very definitely, it is probably the most pluralistic enterprise, that genuinely pluralistic space that I've ever participated in, and delightfully so, and one in which you can keep your convictions and people approach each other with interest about their convictions in a think, generally speaking, a mutually satisfying way, which is quite remarkable. So
yeah, I want to kind of pull a Hezi and be like, can I also be welcome in this? I mean, I know because I'm here, but it's not like I'm in your face. I'm not shoving rainbow cupcakes down people's throats or something like that. Nor do I intend to. But
oh, you are very welcome, CW.
I don't know, man. I don't know, Grim. I don't know if he's gonna let me use the VNA bubble now. He's like, you didn't say you were asexual. What the hell?
If Grim gives you shit, you come talk to me. I'll straighten Grim Grizz out.
You must be on the shadow cabal. See, you've just outed yourself now.
Well, I still have to sign up for a shadow cabal because
you're doing the Minnesota goodbye, Paul. This is like the long goodbye. You're like, it was like 20 minutes ago. You're like, I gotta go. I've been doing this for 5 hours. I gotta go. So you should go. It was good. It
was good, CW. We'll do it again.
Off in internet land, there's nothing we can do.
No, but this will be a landmark. I think this will be a landmark video. Yeah. This was a good one. So All right. I'm doing the Minnesota goodbye. I'll get in the car and drive away.
Okay. Bye bye.
Until the next time.
Peace.